Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your own online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify's there to help you grow. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to the other leading commerce platforms. Because businesses that grow with Shopify. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. Shopify.com/promo.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack. And while Stuart is busy researching our next show, joining me on this episode is a man who first had a big hit over 40 years ago, but is still playing live, still via the website which he set up, Fresh on the Net, is still championing new artists. And as we said, although some of the mechanics of the music industry may have changed over the years during the course of his career, some of the lessons to be learnt from this story, his own story, especially when it comes to money, are, I would suggest, as relevant now as they've ever been. He has a wealth of experience and knowledge and terrific stories to tell you. He's been chased by the tax man, signed and released by record labels, has been a DJ and a songwriting mentor, an activist and campaigner, and he's back out on tour later this year. Welcome the man, the legend, Tom Robinson. Tom, hello.
Hello, Steve.
Thank you very much for speaking to us. Before I start bombarding you with questions about the music biz and how to survive it, how's the book going? Because, dear listener, every time I see Tom, I ask him how he's getting on writing his autobiography. Where is it? Where are you up to?
I keep stalling. I'm still at the roadside. I get 100 yards down the road, and the engine stops.
Someone's gonna write this for you if you don't do it yourself soon. You know that. You know I'm threatening that, don't you?
No, I hadn't heard that threat expressed quite so openly, Steve. But if I wanted anyone to write it, it would definitely be you.
Well, I'd say what. Let's test out some of the stories. Can we start right at the beginning? Because you must have signed a few record deals in your time, and it suddenly struck me though when you were a young man starting out in the business. When did you first sign your first contract, and did you know what you were signing at the time? Were you aware of what to look out for? Did you have a manager who was doing it for you, and if so, did you know what he was letting you in for?
We are talking about 1974 here, so when the lawyer for the record company handed us the draft contract, he said, you must get a lawyer to look at this before you sign it. And that was his obligation, was to say that. And I didn't. I phoned up a friend, just said, we've got this contract they want us to sign. What do you think we should do? And the friend was Alexis Corner, and he said, well, without actually seeing it, it's a bit hard. What does it actually say? And the thing is, at that point, having dreamed of getting signed to a record label one day, I mean, that's as far as we saw. Once you've signed to a record label, you've made it, as far as we were concerned, as naive newcomers. I don't think anybody could have said anything that would have dissuaded us from signing that contract. If it had said, you will give your firstborn child as a blood sacrifice with your first entry into the UK charts, I would have gone, yeah, fine. I really would have signed anything. And I think that is the trouble, that when we first are looking for validation as musicians and looking for access to consumers, to the listening public, we want it at any cost. And I don't think any wise words of counsel, even any that we provide in this podcast, will stop people from signing disastrous contracts if one is on offer and no other offer is there. So we thought, it's either this or nothing. So we signed.
And did it come back to bite you in any way? Did it work out okay in the end?
It worked out so far from okay that it took me even today, I'm still unable to do certain things because of the contract that I signed back then. No. In terms of the publishing. So really? It was catastrophic. And the worst bit of it, I think, was when the record company lawyer said, there's this other thing called publishing that means we can give you an extra 400 quid if you want to sign that. So we were signing a record deal for our recording services, and he said, there's this other thing called publishing. And we went, extra 400 quid, that sounds brilliant. We'll sign that. So we did. I signed a 7-year publishing contract for £400 advance for life of copyright at a 60-40 rate, which was the bare legal minimum that they could get away with. Yeah. And I'm still bound by the terms of that contract for 2468 Motorway, Glad to Be Gay, Martin, many of my earliest and best known songs.
So you're still on the same cut, the same royalty rates? Everything's the same as it was?
Well, the big difference is that it's now administered by BMG Music,
right?
Are administering it. So we don't have a Mickey Mouse company paying us royalties. So the money does actually reach me now.
Right.
And it's ridiculous because we're talking just about publishing, having the money you get for having written a particular song, so that, I don't know, if Adele covers one of my songs, I see the songwriting royalties from that. Yeah. But if she covers 2468 Motorway, I will see 60% rather than 100% of the money that it's generating.
So by the time you end up signing to EMI later in the 70s, this time round, I presume you must go in this time then mob-handed with the nation's greatest lawyers and a management company and a magnifying glass so that you can read all the small print before you even get your pen out.
Having been so incautious early on and so unlucky early on, I then had a huge piece of stupendous luck, which was that EMI introduced me to Steve O'Rourke, who was the manager of Pink Floyd. And he agreed to take on the management of the Tom Robinson Band in collaboration with one of his colleagues. And Steve O'Rourke negotiated the contracts for us. And he negotiated to get me out of the stupid thing that I had rashly signed. And was just still talking the publishing here. To get me out of that publishing contract, we had to pay £20,000 in cash and surrender the rights to my 13 best songs.
No.
So you live and learn. But then what I learned from Steve O'Rourke was the deals he then struck for me for my ongoing songs, so songs like Power in the Darkness, Up Against the Wall, War Baby, etc., into the future. He said, listen, the biggest thing you must know about a publishing contract is you never sign for life of copyright. You only sign a publishing contract if it gives you reversion of copyright. 3 magic words, reversion of copyright, which means that after a certain number of years, the copyrights come back to you. You're only leasing them to the publishing company for a fixed period. And after that, you own the songs again. And that was the thing that has saved me time and time again in the intervening years, is the fact that I still own my publishing catalogue after that first disastrous mistake.
Yeah. So
to anybody listening to this, never, ever, ever sign away your publishing rights for life of copyright. Only do it if you can revert. Now, you may be faced with one of those Elvis Presley situations where anybody who wrote a song for Elvis Presley was told they had to surrender 100% of the songwriting rights to, that was Colonel Tom Parker.
Yeah.
And the only point of having Elvis cover one of your songs was that you would be the guy that wrote that song that Elvis just did, and you'd get loads more commissions and you'd make tons and tons of money off the back of it. But in terms of money from the thing you wrote, nope. And you may get put into that position by a TV company, for instance, who have a new equivalent to The Crown, a big Netflix series coming up. And we want to use your song X as the theme tune, or we want you to write the theme tune. And they may strong arm you into saying, we have to publish that. You can't have the copyright of that. That has to be through us, because huge money is being going, tens of millions are being invested into that. And the money people are saying the income streams have to be maximized. So there may be occasional exceptions where you have to look to the greater good and agree for a particular project to surrender that right. But if you humanly can, get your copyrights back after ideally 5 years, certainly no more than 10, and it comes back. So this was 1978. I signed a publishing deal with EMI Publishing, engineered by Steve O'Rourke on very favourable terms. And in 1988, I never imagined I'd live to 38. I thought that was like really impossibly old. But having signed it at 28, when it felt like the world was ending and anarchy in the UK, and dystopian future ahead, I'd never thought I'd see my late 30s. But suddenly, at age 38, the whole publishing comes back to me. All the songs that I'd written since the early ones. So War Baby, Listen to the Radio, Power in the Darkness, all came back to me at the end of that contract. And suddenly I was able to go to Blue Mountain Music, and they gave me another whacking great advance to take the catalogue on for another 10 years. And suddenly I was solvent again at a quite difficult time. So I certainly didn't expect to live to 48, but bizarrely in 1998, suddenly all the catalogue came back to me and I could go to a fresh publisher. And a couple of times since that has happened, I'm now 74 and still own all my copyrights after that first disastrous mistake.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, the publishing, because it's such an important part of making a living out of music. And I always say to bands, because it's difficult right at the very start, because you can sign a little publishing deal and they will give you a little bit of money, and that might help you get to the next stage. But if you can get to the next stage on your own, when the publishers do come round, you can demand a much higher fee at the start when you sign that contract. It's getting the balance right, I guess, isn't it?
It's absolutely correct. But I'd say on top of that, getting the reversion of the copyright is so important, because even if it means, if you want that, we can't give you such good terms.
Yeah.
It's still worth it.
Yeah.
Because if in the meantime, I don't know, Taylor Swift, let's say, covers one of your songs while you're on that contract, even if the terms are less favourable than you might have got elsewhere, so long as you've got the reversion at the end of the period, that Taylor Swift song comes back to you, and you can make an incredibly good deal on the next time around. Yeah. So always get the reversion first, terms second.
You mentioned being solvent with a slight smile, which suggests that at points in your career you have been insolvent. Shall we start with, because you signed and made 2 albums for EMI, starting with Power in the Darkness, which is still one of my favourite records of all time. It's a brilliant record, and then followed it with TRB2, which, I mean, despite the fact that goes top 20, the album, you hit a bit of a rocky patch at that point. And tell us, pick up the story. So EMI start wavering over whether to make any more records. What happens next?
Well, the trouble is that I'd formed the band, the Tom Robinson Band, with an absolutely brilliant guitar player called Danny Custo. That was the upside. The downside was that Danny and I had met at a therapeutic community for disturbed adolescents in our teens. And the band therefore contained the seeds of its own destruction, because within less than 2 years, within even 8 months, we were fighting like cats in a sack. And the band just imploded about 2 years after forming. So there wasn't any possibility, because at the same time, even if we had been willing to continue working together, the hits had dried up. Mm-hmm. And I'd stopped writing songs that people wanted to hear. And when the band fell apart, I left Steve O'Rourke's management and I formed a new band, thinking I could start all over again from scratch with a new band and a new set of songs and reinvent myself. But you can't. It was very naive to suppose you could, because there was still a big audience for the old stuff that I was walking away from, and nobody wanted to hear the new band. It was called Sector 27, and it was an attempt to kind of do something a bit more northern and industrial than the kind of Manchester sound. And I wasn't really cut out to pull it off. And after having made a third record with what remained of the money, the new management company went bankrupt. And then I started getting calls at 8 a.m. from Customs and Excise, the VAT people, and the Inland Revenue, going, all that money you had, where's ours? And it turned out no tax had been paid on any of those earnings for the previous 4 years. And so went to look for the accounts. The accountants we had been paying huge sums to hadn't done the job. There weren't accounts for that period. It was just like a box of receipts in their offices. So there was literally nothing you could do. Yeah. And I owed far, far more money just to the government, let alone to all the other people we owed money to, hire companies and what have you, lawyers' fees that hadn't been paid, far more than I had assets or any prospect of ever earning back. And in the middle of all this kind of complete collapse of everything, and the likelihood that the Customs and Excise would levy distress upon my goods and chattels, as is their legal right, I seize my £20,000 home as as a small sop towards the kind of £120,000 debt I had. I had another stroke of brilliant good fortune, which is that one of the members of the second band, Sector 27, was very pally with the people in Queen, and he put me in touch with Queen's accountants. And I went to see these kind of grave-faced men in a small suburban accountancy firm in the Finchley Road. Didn't look particularly imposing from the outside, but it was, they were very turned out quite brilliant people. I sat down and for 2 hours went through the details of the 4 different service companies that had been set up, all of which were insolvent, the VAT arrangements, the band breakup arrangements of who owed what to who. And at the end of it, the main accountant just looked at his notepad and said, right, so to sum up, you are currently the director of Wong Sang Limited, Varwain Limited, Leperine Limited, and blah, 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 blah. Named all the directors. He'd taken the whole thing in. He gave it back to me, what had taken 2 hours. He gave it back to me in 3 minutes. He said, right, if that's correct, then here's what we do. From now on, anytime you get a phone call from the government, inspectors of revenue or customs and excise, refer them to us. I said, but we haven't got any money. There's nothing I can do. I can't pay them. And this guy said, don't worry. Tell them to talk to us. We are now your accountants. From tomorrow, you are on PAYE, and you'll be filing monthly tax returns, and your affairs will be in apple pie order, done by us. And from now on into the future, all your things will be absolutely by the book and perfect. And there will be a 4-year black hole, and we will eventually fill that in. But in the meantime, get them to talk to us. I said, well, what are you going to say to them? How will you? And he said, look, we'll say to them, you have a choice. You are owed £120,000 and you have no chance of getting it. If you bankrupt Tom, you'll get his house and that will be it. So you'll lose. If you deal with us, we will make a deal and pay you back this much a month for as long as it takes until the whole thing is paid back off. And you'll get all your money if you wait. And that was a novel concept, you know.
That's amazing.
And it took until 1992, but we did pay it all off.
1992,
so that was about 10 years later, but we did finally pay the whole thing off. The worst thing, I think, was that in the intervening years, I had another hit, unexpectedly, at very low budget single called War Baby, which I'd fled the country to Germany to escape all the people I owed money to. And while there, wrote this song, brought it back, took it around all the record companies. They all passed on it. They said, you know, you're 33, Tom. You've had your chance. You're not, you know. And let's face it. And let's face it. This song is hardly another 2468 motorway, is it? You know. So they all passed on it. So I found a young A&R man who worked for another company called Mark Dean, and he said, "No, that's a hit, mate. It's definitely a hit. We'll put it out on your own label." And he secretly arranged for me to put it out on my own label, Panic Records. And he persuaded a plugger called Gary Farrow to go to Radio 1 and sell them on the idea that this was a hit. And astonishingly, it was. And it went from nowhere to about 38 in the charts. The following week, it went up to number 6. And then the pressing company that we had engaged to actually do the pressings had a brainstorm and forgot to order any more stock. And the following week, there was no stock in the shops for 3 days. And it stalled at 6. And once it had stopped going up the charts, then everyone lost interest. Radio 1 stopped playing it. That was.
But was it though at that point? I mean, it must have been a great feeling because, you know, I don't know, just to be back in the charts and having done it all yourself. I mean, it's a great vindication of your ability as a songwriter, I think, or it must have felt like that. Did it at the time?
It's I mean, the vindication was amazing. But it had its downsides too, because all the people that I still owed money to, that we were patiently paying back, went, "Oh, you've just had a hit. Well, come on, cough up."
Yeah.
But I didn't have any money. You know, the pressing people was supposed to account to us, but only 6 months in arrears after deductions for breakages and all the rest of the nonsense that the music industry has. So I almost went bankrupt all over again, thanks to having a hit.
You mentioned earlier on, if you write a song and somebody covers it, that can be incredibly beneficial. If it's a big artist who goes on to have a massive hit album, even if you've only got one track on it, then that's still a decent wad of money coming your way. What about going the other route and writing with people? There seems to be a lot of co-writing going on at the moment, and even people who've had careers as front people in bands or songwriters in bands have gone away, stepped away from the spotlight, and now spend their time co-writing with maybe more emerging artists. I mention this partly because at some point you end up writing with Elton John.
Well, at that time, there weren't many out LGBT artists in the late 70s. In fact, you could count them on the fingers of one hand. There was him and me.
It's about the size of it, yeah.
There really weren't. There was Janice Ian in the States, but she wasn't really what you call out. But there weren't. There were, of course, lots and lots of LGBT artists, but nobody was out in the open. And I think it was for the Guinness Book of Hit Singles, in the one that was coming out in 1979. Paul Gambaccini and Tim Rice had the brilliant idea of doing a photo shoot of lots of people who'd had hits over the previous kind of 20, 30 years. And I got the call to come and be in the photo because at that time I had just had a hit. And so I found myself summoned to rub shoulders with the likes of Dame Vera Lynn and Cliff Richard and Jonathan King and the Drifters and Dave D of Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick and Titch. A huge galaxy of people. Joe Brown, Kate Bush, Billy Idol, Paul Jones from Manfred Mann. Anyhow, I'm looking for this place to go turn up for the photo shoot on my Honda 125 in the rain. And this vintage Bugatti pulls up beside me and a smoke glass window winds down from the rear seat and says, "Excuse me, can you tell me where Grosvenor House is?" And I say, "Well, I'm looking for it myself." And it's Elton John in the car asking for directions to the same place I'm trying to get to on my Honda 125. And when we actually got out of the rain and into the building and got chatting, we both thought we'd hate each other. He thought, who's this gobby gay activist git doing his whole kind of rock against racism, pro-punk kind of mouthy stuff. And I thought, who's this flash git dripping with diamonds, living the most decadent, opulent lifestyle? But actually, he's a really nice bloke. And we hit it off, and he invited me and my boyfriend to go around to his house for dinner the next night. And when songwriters meet, one of the natural things they tend to do is write songs. Mm-hmm. So I gave him a couple of lyrics that I had spare, and he wrote songs to them. And then he came back to me with a tune that he had. And he said, "I think this is a love song. I'm not talking to Bernie at the moment. I'm writing with Gary Osborne. But I think this should be a love song. And do you fancy writing a love lyric for this?" Because he knew he'd get a gay love lyric out of this. And so I actually wrote a lyric about the one time I'd been really obsessively in love, which had been at boarding school. And I'd been kind of really head over heels about another boy at school, which was a catastrophe in the 60s. Well, it could be at any time, but at that time, gay men went to prison for 4 years. So I would rather have died than tell anybody at the school that I was in love with this other guy, including him. So I wrote a song about this kind of terrible, heartbroken, unrequited love affair. And Elton really liked it, and he put it out on his album, The Fox. And I didn't have a title for it, so I'd just written Elton's song at the top when I posted him the lyric. And he thought, oh, that's a good title. So he actually called it Elton's song on his record. And he still occasionally plays it live. So he obviously still likes it. And I think the fact that I had a small publishing income from Elton releasing these tracks as album tracks helped put bread on the table during those kind of really lean early years before War Baby and after the breakup of the first two bands.
Yeah. Could you carry on making records all the way through, through the 90s and the noughties? At one point, though, you also branch out into becoming a radio presenter. And it suddenly struck me, this was probably the first time you've actually been on a wage. You probably had a salary, unless you paid yourself in the TRB, 50 quid a week. You actually had you knew that there would be money there at the end of the month. That must have been quite a novelty, Mr. Robinson.
Well, Steve, the truth is that my radio career began entirely by accident and was never much of a source of income for the first 15 years I was doing it. So what happened was I played a show at the Dominion in 1984, and a producer from the BBC World Service called Annie Bristow came backstage. And I hoped she was going to come in and say, nice show, really like the songs, what a great band. And what she actually said was, I love the bits in between the songs where you were talking to the audience. She said, you've got a great voice for radio. So would you like to have your own 15-minute show every week on the World Service? So I went, yeah, that sounds all right. So we called it New Waves on the Shortwave. And I used to go into Bush House and pre-record it once a week. And the money, compared to what one was making touring with a band behind a hit record, the money didn't come into it. No. And then off the back of that, I got to sit in for Janice Long on Radio 1 for a couple of weeks. And that was quite nice. And off the back of those, I was offered Pick of the Week on Radio 4. And off the back of that, I got offered my own series on Radio 4, a Saturday evening magazine program called The Locker Room, which was a kind of men's equivalent to Woman's Hour. Mm-hmm. So I was talking about men's issues. And for a little while, that ran for 6 series, and that was good. But again, it wasn't for the money, because compared to what you could make from a single night going out and doing a gig, mm-hmm. it really wasn't a consideration. Mm-hmm. So I really stumbled seriously into radio was after John Peel died. I got to do Home Truths for 12 episodes before that show got finally axed, and really, really enjoyed that. And around the same time, one of the producers from my Radio 4 series, The Locker Room, said, could you do us a favour? We're trialling an idea for the BBC for something called digital radio. DAB radio, it's going to be called. And we've got this thing called Network Y. And what we need is just somebody to come and read out, that was, this is, so we can hear how certain playlists work. And there wasn't any money. It was just doing a favour to a friend. So I was just every few weeks turning up and getting a bit of paper and reading out, that was, this is, and occasionally embellishing it. But I didn't think any more about it. But Gideon Coe around the same time was doing the same thing. And they've got a few kind of friends and allies. And I gradually got sucked into this Network Y team where you just go in to see what was happening and what the latest developments were. And one day, Jim Moyer and Leslie Douglas from Radio 2 walked into the team and said, we've got it. They've awarded us the station. We've got a green light. Whatever it's going to be called, it's going ahead. and everybody, got wild cheering, popping of bubbly, all the rest of it. And I nearly fell off my perch when Leslie Douglas, who was the deputy head of Radio 2, called me in and said, this new network is going to be called Six Music, and we'd like you to present the evening show from 7 to 9:30 p.m. And I said, well, that's really flattering, but I'm afraid I can't do it. And she said, why not? I said, because I have to tour to put bread on the table. I have to go out and do gigs. That's what I do. I'm a touring musician. And she said, well, how much do you make as a touring musician? And I told her. She said, well, we'll pay you that. I said, all right, deal. Because the idea of not having to go out and play to 50 people at the Wheatsheaf in Stoke-on-Trent who would shout for 30-year-old songs and then carry on shouting for them after you'd played them, as a humiliating way of earning 100 quid. It was just grim at that time, I hadn't yet made it to the kind of stage where nostalgia fans now regard the kind of classic era of the 70s and 80s records as being something of worth. It was the tail end of a kind of has-been career that I was milking with solo gigs to try and eke out a living. So I was able to give that up and know where the next paycheck was coming from, sleep in my own bed, see my own kids grow up, and have a job. And it was a crash course in new music because for the previous 10 years, I hadn't had time to listen to anything. Yeah. For instance, I'd heard about this band Radiohead. And so I pulled into a service station and said, give me something by Radiohead. I want to check them out. So they handed me Kid A on a cassette. Right. And I put it into the car stereo and listened to it all the way through. And I said, if that's the future of music, I don't want any part in that. Threw it out the window. That's fucking awful. It's kind of sub Brian Eno. It's pathetic. And why are people raving about this? And you didn't know the context of what it had followed and why they'd made it. Yeah. So I arrived at Six Music with an aversion to anything by Radiohead.
Which I'm surprised they let you in the door. It was like when I arrived, even in my first week at the NME, where I said, I'm not really that fussed by the Smiths, and I thought they were just going to turn us round and walk us back to the lift. You can't work for the NME and not like the Smiths, young man.
Well, my producer James Sterling absolutely knew what he was doing because in 2004 he said, listen, I'm going to play you a record. I'm not going to tell you who it is. Just put on a record, a 4-minute record, put it on. And it blew my socks off. I went, whoa, whoever this is, we've got to get them in. He said, it's Radiohead. The song was there. And it was extraordinary. Yeah. And the reason he'd played it to me was that Radiohead agreed to do an in-depth interview with Six Music. And Tom York had specified, I want that guy that's on in the evening because I like the way he talks about music. And he'd specifically asked for the Tom Robinson show.
Little did he know.
So I then got shuffled off to go and see Radiohead at Shepherd's Bush Empire. And again, socks left my feet at a high velocity. And, just blew me away.
I mean, this was very. I guess this might be quite timely. This radio career, because everything else, as a musician, although you're still making records, and as you say, eventually, I guess the fact that you are Tom Robinson and people are coming back to the music of their youth, and there is more of an appetite to go out and see some of that music live. Before that hits, I wondered how technology was affecting your revenue stream in a way, because obviously you have to go through all the changes of formats. So we've moved from vinyl to CD. CD for a while, I imagine, is okay, because some of your records will be reissued on a new format and people will buy them again. But then we move from CD into the days of the streaming service. And as someone who, makes some money out of their catalogue, how has that changed for you? We've had quite a few people recently who've been in bands in the 70s and 80s saying it's wiped out so much of our income.
Catastrophic. It's fallen off a cliff. So in terms of that, this is in recent years. I mean, early on, with the rise of iTunes and everything, it didn't affect it. But once we got to Spotify, that's kind of the beginning of the end. And you have to be on Spotify, I think. I mean, some artists boycott it because the rates are so ridiculously low. But I think it's worth having your music there, because if people come looking for you, they need to be able to find you. If you want them to actually discover your back catalogue, it has to be where people are going to listen to their music. But then the important thing is not to buy into the whole music industry myth. So many artists that I came to during the 15 years I was doing the BBC Introducing show do what managers and labels and pluggers tell them to do. And on their Instagram profile or their Twitter profile or their Facebook profile, the only link is to their Spotify. And that's fatal. You're sending them off your platform and onto somebody else's, rather than to your own link tree, a thing that you control, your own website. And the important thing is to give people the option of supporting you on Bandcamp and to support you by buying downloads and paying more if they want, because consumers of music want to support the artists. They don't want to rip us off, but they will find us listening on the cheap on Spotify. And then if they really want to discover the artist, they'll go to the artist's own website. And it's important not to send them away from a space that you control to a space that somebody else controls. So Bandcamp is an excellent platform for selling downloads and also selling merchandise. There's a shop in there. And they pay far, far more per download than any other service. So anybody that doesn't have a Bandcamp for their music is missing out, because, well, there's a big because here, Steve. A realization that I've come to in the last 10 years is that the music industry is not our friend. I don't know. It took me a long time.
I was going to say,
it took me a long time.
Has the music industry ever been the friend of any artist, really? Or
No.
Well, any artist who isn't making them obscene amounts of money?
Yeah. Well, it's true. But in the last century, you had to do a deal with the devil. You had to have the music industry and you had to have BBC Radio. If you didn't have BBC Radio, nobody would ever hear your music. That was the bitter truth of it. And BBC Radio has acted as the marketing arm of the record industry. Very much so. Yeah. In a shameful way, to be honest. And BBC Introducing is the one redeeming feature, because an artist doesn't have to have a plugger to get onto a BBC Introducing show. They don't have to have insider contacts. They don't have to have enough money to be able to put it under the nose of a particular presenter or producer. They can upload it, whoever they are, wherever they are in the UK, and it will get heard. All you have to be is good. Yes. And for the first time, you don't have to have insider contacts. You don't have to have money. You don't have to have a big shop manager. You just have to be good. And that's an incredible move forward for the BBC to make that an offer to artists everywhere. And from that support, you can then go on.
can I also mention, while we're talking about championing artists and what you did with BBC Introducing and your other shows on Six Music, aside from that, there's also Fresh on the Net, which is another great resource for emerging talents. If you are an artist, musician, making music at the moment, and you'd like to have a look, Tom, just explain it. It's sort of it's each week people put music forward, and a little panel have a sift through the many hundreds of tracks, and then put together a bit of a playlist, and that's how it goes.
Yeah, it's imperfect, but it's at least some other place that you can actually get to a wider audience. I've stepped down now, having founded it and run it for best part of 12 years. I'm now in a backseat role and just kind of helping out when I can, handing it to the current generation. But the idea is anybody can upload a track to us, and unlike BBC Introducing, it's anybody anywhere in the world can upload it, anything. So it is worldwide. And all you need to do is put it on a SoundCloud, upload it to SoundCloud, and then share it with us. And the panel are geographically dispersed, and we can all listen to the same SoundCloud playlist, and collectively they choose their 25 favourites and put them on a voting panel for the public at the weekend. And it's so different from other kind of vote for your favourite music websites, because people are not allowed to say they're on there. It's
right.
It's got to, if as soon as we find somebody has got their fan base to vote for them, we disqualify them.
Right.
The song is pulled instantly.
Yeah.
Don't even tell your mum until the voting has closed, because mums get all their mates to go on there, and we notice immediately, suddenly, they pitch in there. The idea is to offer artists a chance to get heard by complete strangers and find out how strong the material is before you risk taking it anywhere else, or risk trying to submit it to radio, or, consider investing money in putting it out commercially.
Yeah, I mean that is a terrifically valued service, I think, because how many times have you had conversations with artists? I think I might have mentioned this before, but I always say to people when they hand us their demo or their first CD, or they're attempting to get you to play their record on the radio, and they probably only started about 9 months ago, and you say, look, just before you give that to me, do you think you're going to be better in a year's time? Yeah, we're going to be so much better. See you in a year's time, then. You can have this back.
It's so right.
It's a good thing.
A saying of yours, Steve, that you told me in relation to that story is, people will listen, but only once.
And ain't that the truth? Just before we have to wrap up, this brings us back to something that you mentioned earlier on about being out on the road and making money from touring. I wonder, because everyone has to be a jack of all trades now. Do you have an agent booking your gigs? Because we should mention you are going very much back out on tour. Well, twice actually. There's 2 runs of dates. There's the solo dates, and there's some TRB dates coming in October. I wonder how strictly you have to budget and think about the spend and how you're going to do it to maximize what you come back with, because we're learning it's quite hard out there on the road at the moment to make money.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would really stress for musicians listening to this is you don't confuse the means with the end. I think that's the single biggest mistake that all of us make, and new artists are prone to it as much as anybody else, is to confuse the means, which is playing Glastonbury, getting on Radio 1, getting on Six Music, getting a record deal, all these as the end. They're not. They're all means to the end. The end is a paying audience for your music. That's the only thing that any of this is about. It's about developing a loyal, paying audience for your music. That's the goal. And people take their eye off that ball and spend so much energy trying to get the attention of gatekeepers rather than focusing on the audience. And it would be better to have 2,000 subscribers to your YouTube channel, to have a week of plays on Six Music, because the plays will come and then they'll go. And you'll be that bloke that was played last year on Six Music. You'll be that bloke that was played the year before last year on Six Music. But the 2,000 subscribers will still be subscribed to your YouTube channel, and everything that you've put up there in those 2 years will have reached them. And you only need 2,000 people to spend, if they care enough about your music, to spend 100 quid a year on concert tickets, crowdfunding campaigns, album sales, T-shirts. That's £200,000 a year turnover.
Yes,
so you can have the smallest following in the world and have a living from music. So it's not about becoming mass famous, or not about getting to play in front of a big audience who are going to forget you the next day. It's about having a direct bond with consumers. And I think the job that we have as broadcasters is to connect consumers with creators as closely as possible, so that the music industry can't insert itself in between the two and cream off all your income. That's what happens. Basically, the music industry exists to supply touring services, managers, accountants, the publishers. They're all there just to cream off the money between the people who are paying for it and the people who are getting paid. So the more direct you can build that relationship, and that's why folk musicians manage to make money where rock musicians don't, because they have a direct relationship. They chuck their guitars into the back of the estate car, rock up to a folk club, play to 100 people, sell them a load of CDs in the interval, go home, bags of money in their pockets. Whereas the people who are waiting for the industry to wave a magic wand and say, yes, you can be a star, are going to go home hungry.
Do you know what? That is a brilliant summary. It's a terrific place to finish this conversation. Do go and see Tom. That's right, isn't it? Some solo shows in August and a tour in October?
No, it's actually band shows in August as well.
I'm sorry, band shows in August as well.
Yeah, the August shows are a warm-up for the autumn, because people have, as you say, the TRB2 album kind of got short shrift in the general scheme of things, and people have been demanding to hear songs from the TRB2 album as well as Power in the Darkness. We're touring those two albums in October, doing I think 5 weeks on the road, and come and see us. It'd be lovely.
Yeah, do. Tom Robinson, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, mate.
Always a pleasure.
Tom Robinson, as you can probably tell, he's someone I do really admire, and I mean, some great stories and also some very sage advice, I think, during the course of the last hour. I hope you found that both informative and enjoyable, and thanks again to Tom for joining us. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. If you have enjoyed the show, please do subscribe in your podcast app and give us a review and a rating, or tell your friends about us. And if you'd like to practically support the show with a tiny bit of cash, we now have a Patreon page where you can become a Price of Music fan or super fan for as little as £2 a month. Just go to patreon.com/thepriceofmusic to find out more. And if you have any questions that either myself or Stuart, or indeed one of our guests, might be able to answer, email your queries, anything about the financial ins and outs of the music industry that you want to know about. The Price of Music Podcast at gmail.com is the address to send your questions to. The Price of Music Podcast at gmail.com. Till next week, take care of yourselves, everybody. Cheerio.